There is currently no better time to be a sports fan, especially a sports fan here in Australia, because we've just had the Ashes kick off. The AFL draft just happened. The AFLW Grand Final is next week, and we get to sit back and watch all of the international sport like the NBA, the NFL, and there is just so much happening, so much to cover. So enough of the yip yap, let's just get straight into it. If you're new here, please feel free to stick around and subscribe. We just talk sports. We tell you all of the news stories, the updates, we cover the sports, we do analysis, we do opinion, we do everything that is in the sports universe. You've got the home of it right here, so stick around and subscribe. But we've got to talk about the Ashes, because the Ashes kicked off last week and we had a 2-day test match, one of the shortest Ashes matches pretty much in the entire history of the Ashes, which goes back an extremely long way. But I think what is most impressive is the fact that there was only about 900 balls bowled in the entire game, or in the entire match. It lasted 2 days, so you could probably understand that. But the reason why it lasted 2 days is the fascinating part that we've got to get into, because on day 2, Australia chased just 205 runs in 28 overs to win by 8 wickets. A genuine demolition really by the Australians on the English team. But why did that happen? Well, we go to day 1 where we had a chaotic day over in Perth. 19 wickets across the day. England all out for 172. Australia pretty much collapsed in that first day, all out for 132. And this is where we started to see the commentary around potentially the pitch or the inability of the Australian batting lineup to deal with the English bowlers that they brought over. Because when you look at a lineup like Jofra Archer, Mark Wood, Atkinson, Stokes, and you look at that, it is understandable to be at least a little bit intimidated, whether you're a fan or whether you are the Australian batting team and the batting lineup. Because that is a team, that is a quartet of bowlers who can all bowl not only extremely high level pace, extremely high paces, but extremely high level areas of bowling, which we saw. We saw Ben Stokes come in towards the middle back end of that innings and just completely clean up the tail on his way to a fifer. But it wasn't just all the English bowlers who had sort of their fair day, because now we've got to talk about Mitchell Starc. I mean, the man took 10 wickets across the match. But what is most impressive is the way that he did it, because he came into the test match with a lot on his shoulders. We obviously have seen Scott Boland play in high-level test matches, but we haven't necessarily needed to rely on him as an opening bowler, as a frontline part of the Australian attack. Usually it is your Starc, your Cummins, your Hazelwood, and then Scotty Boland comes in as that fourth, almost fifth option if there is a Cam Green type bowling as well. So to put the pressure on him in one of his first test matches to come out and open the bowling alongside Mitchell Starc, plus a test debutant in Brendan Doggett, to put those two next to Mitch Starc and say, hey Starkey, you're going to have to carry the load of not having Paddy Cummins, of not having Josh Hazelwood against a really aggressive, a really high-level batting team, a really deep batting team that the English produce and that the English brought over for this Perth Test match. That is an incredible, incredible effort from Mitch Starc. Not only to deliver the quality that we always see him deliver, but to deliver the quality given the circumstances that he was put in. And whilst the first innings for both teams is interesting, it's really not that interesting. What we really want to speak about is the second innings, because this is the more important part of the match, and I think the part of the match that inspires the most questions for both teams leading into the second test match. So we get into the second innings, and as usual, England just collapse. This is becoming a pattern of behavior from this English batting lineup, is they just cannot seem to put it all together all at once. We saw in the first innings Harry Brook get on a bit of a run. We saw Ben Duckett play quite well. In the second innings, we see Ollie Pope put together some runs here and there, but around these sort of one, maybe flash in the pan sort of players that can be out there for an hour, they just cannot seem to stay at the crease. I mean, Zach Crawley goes for a pair of ducks, and the reason that they brought him over to Australia, as Stuart Broad said on the Channel 7 commentary, is because his batting style should suit Australia, pace and bounce and quickness, but he seems to go out every single time he faces Mitch Starc. We see Joe Root come in, who can bat absolutely anywhere around the world except for Australia. We see Ben Duckett, who can have moments where he looks like he's in the game and then plays a really poor shot. We see Ollie Pope, who looks again like he can play some really good shots here and there, but just doesn't seem to have the patience to put it all together for an entire innings. It's the same with Harry Brook. when he gets away with it like he did in that first innings, it looks incredible. He gets his way to 50. He's charging down the pitch against Mitchell Starc and Scott Boland. And then we get into the second innings and he throws his wicket away. And it's these sort of issues that just keep coming up in this Bazball method. And I know the English don't like us referring to it as Bazball, but that's what it is. It is an aggressive, positive style of batting that everyone else in the world, everyone in the media has proclaimed as this Bazball title. But the issue is, it is extremely hard to do that. Not only for one player to do that, it's extremely hard for an entire team, for their ethos to be that. When you mix being that aggressive for an entire team with against good bowlers like Australia has on pitches that do a little bit like Australia has, you are opening yourself up to so many chances to get out, and that is what creates these just massive collapses. So England in the second innings go all out for 164, leaving 204 runs for the Aussies to chase with 4 days left remaining in the match that they could have used. And this is where we get to the second issue for Australia, and that is the position of Usman Khawaja, because he didn't get to open the batting in the first innings, which is hard enough in itself because the whole lead up to the test has been who's going to open, is Marnus going to, and all of these questions. And we finally looked like we had it figured out. Usman was going to open alongside Jakey Weatherald in his test debut. And then we get to the point, and that is not the combination that we had. So Marnus has to move up. He doesn't play that well. It just throws the entire Australian attack out in the first innings. And then we get to the second innings and we have a similar issue because Usman has to go off the field due to back spasms. We've obviously seen reports come out that he played golf, 18 holes of golf, in the 3 days leading up to the test match, which, whether that contributed to the injury, whether that caused the back spasm, it's just not a good look. It is not a good look. And I've read that it is part of his preparation. I've read that it's part of the tradition. But when you do have these injuries and people look at what may have caused the injuries, it doesn't matter if you've done this 50 times before. The only time people are going to criticize you is when it happens and you get injured. So now we're getting to the point where we're having to throw the order around and people are a bit frazzled. But luckily we had one man to lead the show, and that's Travis Head. And Travis Head is just an incredible player, not only because of what he did and the skill set he has, the fact that he can do it so calmly, the fact that he can take Jakey Weatherald along for the ride with him and take the pressure off the test debutant, and then be able to put the pressure back on the English bowlers, because the English bowlers looked like they had us covered in the first innings. We get to the second innings and now they're coming up against Travis Head and he's putting the pressure back on them. They start bowling really short. They start missing their lines. He starts forcing them to change their fielding positions. He starts forcing them to change their bowling plans, and he just continually challenged them over and over and over again, over after over, bowler after bowler after bowler, on his way to a match-winning century. Is the pressure going into the second test on the English batters? Is the most pressure on Usman Khawaja? Is the most pressure on the Australian selectors? Because if Travis Head is going to play at that level opening the batting, is that going to allow a Bo Webster type? Is that going to open space for Paddy Cummins to come in and not mess up the order if we leave a player like Usman Khawaja out and we can have Travis Head open the batting? We've seen him open the batting in T20. We've seen him open the batting in ODIs. Can he now make the transition to being a full-time opener for Australia in a position where we really struggle to find openers, where we've had so many opener issues and struggles in finding high quality openers? Can Travis Head fill that void? Let me know all of your thoughts about it in the comments down below. Then we're going to stick in Australian sport and we're going to talk about the AFL, and most predictably the AFL draft, because it is the night of nights for a lot of teams. It is the night that inspires so much hope in a lot of fan bases. And it's a very exciting period because we're seeing the best of these young players get drafted. Not only they're achieving their lifelong dreams, which is incredible to watch, but also a lot of these teams are pinning a lot of their hopes and their future on these young players, which is fascinating. Now, we have some cool stories coming out of the draft. One, obviously the number 1 draft pick in Willem Dersma, going over to the West Coast Eagles. He's already over there training, which is great to see. Then we have some cool stories, some bolters. So Sullivan Roby goes to Essendon in the top 10. Was largely unspoken about for the majority of this season, and then gets to the point where he's a top 10 pick. We have Latrell Pickett to Melbourne at pick 12, which is a genuine bolter, and the story of getting him over from SA to Melbourne to be there is fascinating. But what I really want to speak about, and what I've seen the most talk about, is the criticism of the AFL draft. And I think it is valid criticism. I just don't know how we fix it. So we understand that the AFL draft is highly, highly compromised at this point. We had father, son, and academy players take up a lot of the top 10, to the point where Richmond, one of the Richmond officials, Richmond list bosses or whatever, had actually came out and complained about it on draft night, because the entire point of the AFL draft system is we don't have a lottery. If you finish 18th, you get the first pick. If you finish 17th, you get the second pick. We don't have a lottery because we want as much equalization in the AFL as possible. But Richmond, who finished second last, who finished 17th, their first pick was not pick 2. Their first pick was pick 7, because we had academy bids and we had father-son bids, all before they could get a genuine pick 7, which should have been pick 2. And that just lends itself to the compromised nature of the draft, which is such an interesting conversation, because on one hand, I love the nostalgia and the allure of the father-son pick. I think connecting the past to the present to the future is an awesome thing, and it's a unique part of our sport. But then I also see the issue that the lower level clubs and a lot of the newer clubs don't have those father-sons and won't have those father-sons for a long time. And then we get to the northern academies and the academy picks and the NGA picks, where they do such incredible work growing the game wider than it has been, because a lot of these players who come through these academies would not be playing AFL if it wasn't for the academy. And I genuinely have not heard of a solution that fixes it. I know we've got solutions left, right, and center, where maybe the top 10 of the draft is completely protected. And maybe that's a great idea. Maybe that means that at least the top 10 draft picks are completely uncompromised. But then we're going to see a lot of these northern academies probably reduce funding or reduce their development of these players, because they know that they're not going to have access to them in the top end of the draft. So why would Gold Coast spend all of this time and energy and money developing a player like Zeke Uland if they're not going to get the reward of developing that player? They're not going to have access to him. So these are the trade-offs and the compromises that the AFL has had to make, because the clubs are the ones investing in these players. And then if they don't have access to them, why would they invest in these players? And I don't know how to fix that issue. If you've got a solution, please feel free to let me know. Then we've got to get away from the AFL system just for a little bit. We've got to get away from Aussie sports and let's go international. Let's go overseas and let's have a quick look at the NBA, because we are just about a month in, just over a month into the NBA season, and it is going swimmingly. The NBA ratings are through the roof. The interest is through the roof, and there's great reason why. One, because we might be looking at the best NBA team of all time, at least on a win percentage basis, because the Oklahoma City Thunder are currently 17-1, on pace for a 75+ win season. Now, let's remember that the record win total is held by the 2016 Golden State Warriors at 73 wins and 9 losses. And one, I think Oklahoma can keep up this pace because we've seen them win a championship. They are a proven commodity. They can win games. We understand they can win games. Not only win games throughout the regular season. I mean, I think they won 68 games last year. So they were already close to that record, and they've only gotten better. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is still playing at an incredibly high level. Chet Holmgren has developed into a legit number 2, and their second best player from last year still hasn't gotten on the court yet. So he's going to come into this lineup and be better. He's going to push another starter to the bench. And speaking of their bench players, they've got 5, maybe 6 bench players who would start on the majority of NBA teams around the league. That is how deep their roster is, and that is how generationally talented this team is. And they might go on and break that record, which is fascinating. But what makes the NBA so interesting this year is the fact that there are so many good teams around. So we have Oklahoma is in a league of their own, but then we have teams like the Houston Rockets, who added Kevin Durant in the offseason, who look really, really good. And if they can figure out this offense, which is going to take a while, they are going to be really, really hard to beat. We've got, obviously, the Denver Nuggets. Nikola Jokic is still one of, if not the best player in the NBA. He's putting up unbelievable numbers, and that Nuggets team looks really good, with Aaron Gordon having an extremely good season despite a recent injury. We have the Lakers, led by Luka for the majority of the start of this season, but now LeBron comes back in and that dynamic, but they're playing really, really well. The Toronto Raptors, led by Brandon Ingram and Scotty Barnes, are playing extremely well. We have the Philadelphia looking extremely, extremely good in the East as well, with Tyrese Maxey at the helm, playing 45 minutes a night, scoring 50. The NBA at the moment is so fascinating because the level and the standard of play that we are seeing is so incredibly high. It is made for highlights. It is made for you to want to watch. You can turn on the NBA every day at the moment and see a player score 45. And maybe that's an issue in the NBA. Maybe that speaks to the defensive woes. But I think it's just fascinating to look at, knowing that we have some of the best players, most skilled, most talented players of all time playing in the league at the same time. Speaking of American sports, we do have to get to the NFL, which is my favorite sport to watch because the product is incredible, but the storylines are even better. And we have so many storylines this season because the NFL is even more wide open than the NBA. There are probably 7, 8, maybe even 9 teams that if you told me today, if you looked in a crystal ball and you told me that they won the Super Bowl, I'd be like, yeah, I could understand that. Yep, I could see that. There are just teams everywhere that look like they can win the Super Bowl, which is unbelievable. But 2 headlines that I really want to focus on. One is the race for the MVP because it was close for a while. There were a lot of different options. I think Matthew Stafford has started to pull away from New England's Drake May, but there is a sneaky MVP that I want to put on the board because Matthew Stafford at the moment is dominating. The Rams are really good. They're probably going to win the conference. They're going to get the 1 seed, you would assume, which is great for an MVP. And if he wins an MVP, we're looking at Matthew Stafford, the Hall of Famer, despite his win-loss record, which doesn't look like a Hall of Fame record, but that's because he spent the majority of his career in a just decrepit Detroit Lions team. The second quick-fire storyline that I want to just touch on is the Kansas City Chiefs, because despite their record this entire season and despite the games that they have lost to teams like the Jacksonville Jaguars and things like that, they have still one of the best odds to win the Super Bowl. And that is just the ultimate sign of respect to Andy Reid and the ultimate sign of respect to Patrick Mahomes. And the third storyline I want to talk about is the dark horse MVP favorite, because the MVP has largely become a quarterback's award. And then we saw what Saquon Barkley did last year, and there were calls for him to win the MVP as a running back. And then we saw how Jonathan Taylor started this season, and people were calling for him to win the MVP award. But what we're seeing in the last couple of weeks is the renewed conversation around Myles Garrett, the defensive end for the Cleveland Browns, potentially winning the MVP award, or at least getting a lot of votes on the ballot, because he's currently on pace to break the sack record, which has stood for decades and decades now, 20 plus years. And he's going to do it on a team that is horrible, but their defense is really, really good. And that makes for a fascinating argument, because on one side of the argument, you have all-time level of play in Myles Garrett, and his side of the ball, the defense for the Cleveland Browns, is really, really, really good. And then on the other hand, you have pundits and commentators, one, saying he's not a quarterback, so there's no chance he's going to win it, and two, their team sucks. But does team record really come into it when you don't control the other side of the ball like a Myles Garrett? Like, how does a defensive end control wins and losses? How do you quantify his ability to impact wins and losses on an NFL team? And that is going to be a really interesting conversation leading towards the end of this year, especially if he does break that record, because although he's basically a surefire for Defensive Player of the Year, I think he has to be considered for MVP nominations if he does indeed break this sack record, which he is on pace to do. And then finally, we will wrap it up with some news surrounding the AFLW, because last night they held the AFLW Awards, and the AFLW Best and Fairest for season 2025 is North Melbourne's midfielder Ash Riddell. Now, a lot of people will say that North Melbourne midfielder Jazz Garner probably should have won it 2 or 3 times by now, but it goes to a different North Melbourne midfielder in Ash Riddell, who has broken disposal records left, right, and centre in multiple games this year, and has been a real dominant part of this North Melbourne midfield, which has just completely dominated the league on their way to an unbeaten streak that is going to hold in the AFLW for a while. Which leads us to the grand final, because for the 3rd year in a row, we are going to have North Melbourne versus Brisbane, and they've each won one of those grand finals. Brisbane 2 years ago, North Melbourne last year. So North Melbourne looking for back-to-back. Brisbane looking to complete the entire sweep of the Aussie major sports after winning the AFL Premiership, the NRL Premiership, and the NRLW Premiership. They might win the AFLW Premiership and just completely wipe the Australian sports over in Brisbane, which would be a fascinating story. Now, North clearly are the benchmark in the AFLW, but what we did see in the prelim final was they are beatable. There are ways that you can beat them. We saw Melbourne put up a very good fight, and I would be staggered if the Brisbane coaching staff and the Brisbane players aren't watching that game in detail, trying to find the little intricacies of how you can challenge North Melbourne. And I think Brisbane are going to challenge them in the same way. I think Brisbane have a real chance at winning this game, and it's just going to be a fascinating game to watch. What I really want to know is all of your thoughts and opinions. So if you have any thoughts or opinions on any of these topics, feel free to please let me know. I love replying to comments. I love having these conversations about sports. And obviously, if you stuck around this long, you may as well subscribe. You may as well subscribe. This is not the style of video that I will be traditionally making. This is more just about getting used to getting back into the flow of making videos before we hit a massive 2026 where there's just so many things planned that I'm really excited to speak about. That I'm just really excited about the Aussie sports scene as a whole going into next year. So please feel free to stick around and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.